Hello, everybody. It's me, it's Andrew Harvey, and I am absolutely thrilled to be joined by my conspirator in crime, my old conspirator in crime, Carolyn Baker. It's always wonderful to be with you, Carolyn. And
Wonderful to be with you, Andrew. Thank you.
thank you, sweetheart. What we're going to do today is something very exciting. We're both going to talk about our new books and how they dance together. Carolyn has just produced this absolutely extraordinary book called Undaunted, which I've read 3 times and bought 10 copies of to give to everybody. I'm thinking of standing on the side of the street actually and just handing it out because this book is a compendium of wisdom, of hard earned, rugged, but very encouraging wisdom for getting through our truly bizarre and catastrophic times. And I've just brought out a book which seems very different, but actually you're going to find out is very deeply linked to the message of Undaunted. And it's called Love is Everything, a year with Hadewijch of Antwerp, who's a 13th century Beguine mystic and who is returning in this book for the first time, really for 600 years, to give us her message of being truly undaunted. And it's my hope that this dialogue will get any of you who haven't yet bought Carolyn's book to really plunge into it. And also my hope is to invite you to read it with Hadewijch, because the reason why I worked for 3 years so intensely to bring Hadewijch out is because she is an indomitable mystic teacher of courage in the face of really terrifying odds and impossibilities. So here we are, Carolyn and myself, and I'm going to start our conversation by inviting Carolyn to read out a passage from her book. You'll find it on page 52 and then 53 and 54. A magnificent passage about the dangers of hope. Let's start there.
Of course, Andrew. The first quote that I would like to read that begins that particular chapter is from Václav Havel.
Mm.
And he says, "Hope is a dimension of the soul, an orientation of the spirit, an orientation of the heart. It transcends the world that is immediately experienced and is anchored somewhere beyond its horizons. It is not the conviction that something will turn out well, but the certainty that something makes sense regardless of how it turns out."
So amazing.
The next quote is from Thomas Merton, who says, "Do not depend on the hope of results. You may have to face the fact that your work will be apparently worthless and even achieve no result at all, if not perhaps results opposite of what you expect. As you get used to this idea, you start more and more to concentrate not on the results, but on the value, the rightness, the truth of the work itself. You gradually struggle less and less for an idea and more for specific people. In the
Mm.
end, it is the reality of personal relationship that saves everything." And then, of course, our friend T.S. Eliot, who said, "I said to my soul, be still and wait without hope, for hope would be hope for the wrong thing. Wait without love, for love would be love of the wrong thing. There is yet faith, but the faith and the love are all in the waiting. Wait without thought, for you are not ready for thought. So the darkness shall be the light, and the stillness the dancing."
Wow.
Ah,
That's really taken from St. John of the Cross, too. That was Eliot's
yes,
reworking of St. John of the Cross. It's
yes,
absolutely wonderful, yes.
yes. And then there was another place you wanted me to
I
focus
wanted you to read your own wonderful text down to that last part in 54. So really go for it, Carolyn. This is one of the major themes of your book.
Sure, sure. Yes, and I put this in italics because I thought it was so important for us to metabolize this. Our death grasp on
Oh,
hope.
no, no. One of my start after the T.S. Eliot and then go down to that because
Oh,
the whole
okay.
section mess it up because we all really need to hear what you're saying.
Okay, of course. One of my direct intentions in writing this book is to dismantle all forms of conventional, culturally cherished hope that the reader may have. While that may sound like a brutal admission, I assert that nothing has been more brutal than the murder of this planet in the name of our hope that climate chaos will diminish, deteriorate, or entirely disappear, or that our species will mitigate it sufficiently so that it can be reversed or ended. In fact, it is our constant addiction to hope, even our pontifications that hope is our moral obligation, that have allowed us to kick the climate can down the road until it exploded in our faces.
Oh my God, yes.
We can thank both the chimera of certainty and our addiction to hope for delivering us to our current ecocidal destination. Addicts who have spent many years in recovery often report that while they've had some indication of what sober living could bring them, they have joyously discovered dimensions of their own being that they could not have known in a state of addiction. Full disclosure, I'm here to take away your hope in exchange for your discovery of the creativity, compassion, connection, and courage that are available when you give up hope. Author, farmer, and cultural activist Stephen Jenkinson offers a unique and exhilarating redefinition of the word catastrophe. In his superb wordsmithing fashion, he analyzes the ancient origins of the word, which are remarkably relevant to this moment in the history of our planet. Noting the prefix kata, and noting the fact that it is a preposition carrying the, quote, volatility, the direction, the thrust, and purpose of that part of speech, it answers the question, where? Well, the answer is down or below.
Mm.
In ancient Greek mysteries, down or below did not mean hell. Rather, it meant beneath what we are ordinarily granted to see. It pointed to a descent, but a descent with a purpose. It also carried the connotation that the descent was not merely down, but also in. Greek mysteries were all about descending into the depths of the soul in order to experience the sacred, the profound, the divine. And then comes the suffix strophe, whose older meaning was a thing braided together or woven or gathered in a pattern and strategy. When joined with kata, we can infer that the descent that takes us downward and inward is one that has meaning and purpose. It is not done in isolation. It is a descent into the deepest mysteries of the universe. It involves many parts of the individual psyche, as well as reciprocity and kinship with external allies. Or, as Jenkinson summarizes, catastrophe means that, yes, your descent into the mysteries will be a solitary one, and yes, you will have companions nonetheless. So, our current climate catastrophe is compelling us into a descent that we cannot control, that will plunge us into the depths of the mystical experiences of our own sacred being.
Amazing.
Moreover, we are not the first humans to have experienced catastrophe, nor do we need to experience it alone. We can and must descend together with companions. Our death grasp on hope invariably precludes the possibility of a meaningful descent into the mysteries into which we are being drawn in these dangerous times. It also prevents our being braided together or woven in community as we descend.
That is such a brilliant and rugged and demanding passage, and I would love to ask you to comment more deeply on two sentences that leap out at me. It is our constant addiction to hope, even our pontifications that hope is our moral obligation, that have allowed us to kick the climate can down the road until it exploded in our faces. We can thank both the chimera of certainty and our addiction to hope for delivering us to our current ecocidal destination. Those are very strong words. What do you mean, Carolyn? Because they need to be driven home, I think, for people really to get the seriousness and the expansive beauty of what you're saying.
Well, it's this almost religious belief, and I think to some extent it is religious, certainly from the Christian tradition, that we have to have hope. Hope is our moral obligation. How dare you look at all of this and not have hope? You have to hope in something. You know, otherwise you've just given up. And so we hope and we hope and we hope, and as a result, nothing significant, really truly significant, has happened that will prevent climate catastrophe. You know, and so it's this chimera of certainty and this addiction to hope that has gotten us where we are.
And
so
the addiction to hope is especially strong and crazy in American culture, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Because of the Disneyfication of everything. So you cannot say anything severe or strong without having to reach for some glimmer of hope, otherwise people won't listen to you. Instead of really asking the question, do we need this kind of hope in this situation, and does it really help us?
Exactly. You know, I spoke with an activist recently who said, I don't know what I would do if I thought that all of my activism was for nothing and that parts of the species might go extinct. I just don't think I could live with that. So I have to hope that that isn't true. And so then I go deeper with that person into what our friend, you know, Margaret Wheatley talks about, which
Right.
is, you know, well, so let's imagine what that's like, that there is no hope, and there you are, and all of your activism, or much of your activism, has not resulted in the outcome that you were so attached to. So then you're back to meaning. So
Right.
why did I do all of that?
Right.
What was that for? And
Right.
then we really begin to go somewhere. That's the strophe, and that's the descent, the kata, the going down into the mysteries, and then going there together with each other.
Absolutely.
That's where we find meaning.
Right.
Not hope, but meaning.
I have a friend who's dealing with the descent into dementia and into serious fragility of her very ancient mother, 94 years old.
Mm-hmm.
There is no hope that her mother, who is a very close friend of mine, is going to suddenly become 60 again and jump up and down and rediscover her memory. But that doesn't stop us all loving her, cherishing her, doing everything we possibly can to make her passing as easy as it can be. And given the situation, it's not going to be that easy, but we know that all of our acts of love are immensely appreciated by her. So that doesn't mean that we have idiotic hope that we're going to somehow miraculously revive her. What it does mean is that we find meaning in cherishing her.
Yes. And on some level, she is finding meaning, you know, whether it's logical, whether it's intellectual, whether it's, you know, cognitive, really making sense to her. She's finding meaning on a deeper level because of your love and kindness to her.
Absolutely. And that gets to that second sentence that I really wanted you to dive into, because it's so dense and so rich, and it's so foreign to what most of the American teachers are selling in the bazaar of the New Age. And you and I both share a sense that it's a catastrophe in the wrong sense. Our death grasp on hope. I love our death grasp on hope. Only you could have written something as naughty as that. Our death grasp on hope invariably precludes the possibility of a meaningful descent into the mysteries into which we're being drawn in these dangerous times. What are those mysteries that we're being drawn into, that this kind of addictive reach after hope prevents us really from experiencing and embodying? What are those mysteries?
Well, I think the first one, which we've been talking about, is meaning.
Right.
If I am only focused on the outcome of this crisis, and I just hope, and maybe I work very hard to make it not happen, then I am missing the deeper meaning that is there for me to experience in the descent. Because I have to ask those basic questions like, who am I and what is this about? And how did I get so disconnected from nature and
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 each other.
and each other?
Right.
And why is it, my God, we're all one? How did it happen that we got separated in our minds from each other? And how do we then braid together and weave this rope ladder of going down into the descent with each other?
So, what the death grasp on hope prevents us from discovering is what Hadewijch and I would call love.
That's
So,
right.
in that great passage from Corinthians, St. Paul, my favorite passage in the New Testament, apart from some things that Jesus said,
Right.
St. Paul says the three great things are faith, hope, and charity. Faith is wonderful, hope is wonderful, but the greatest of all these is love, is charity. And I remember reading that a few years ago when I was beginning to understand that we're in a time in which we had to help two impossibly extreme opposites together. On the one hand, the real possibility of extinction, carrying with us a great deal of nature. And on the other hand, the possibility of what we call radical regeneration in our book, the possibility of a massive evolutionary leap, which I'm also devoted to exploring, living, and helping people understand without illusion. But when I was at my most depressed, I remember reading that passage from Corinthians and saying, oh, yes, that's it. That's what we need to reach for with our mind, our souls, our hearts, our bodies, for a much greater, much deeper, much more connected experience of love that transcends both faith and hope and is the key to what this tragic descent can offer us, if only we have the guts and the direction and the guidance to truly reach for it.
Well, this is the point where I want to ask you, Andrew, because I've read much of Hadewijch's book, and I really would like you to define what you think she means by love, because we,
It's
we
very
have
rich.
we have such a jaded notion of
Yeah.
love, in particularly in American culture.
Well, let's start by saying that's one thing that Hadewijch doesn't mean is anything jaded or banal or purely personal or
Right.
purely human.
Yeah.
When Hadewijch says in one of her meditations, she's just heard a sermon by St. Augustine, and she feels this eruption of energy inside her, and she feels, oh my God, it's so vast, the whole world could catch fire and become ash in this energy. She is connecting with what the great mystics of love connect with from all the different traditions. She's connecting with the vast fiery power of divine love, the love that creates everything, the love that lives in and as everything, the love that is organizing with its mysterious intelligence every process, every event, the love that is the foundation and founding power of the entire universe. And this love, as you discover when you plunge into this book, Love is Everything, is not in any way sentimental or flattering to our human concepts of love. When you hear a lot of New Agers talk about love, they only speak of love as sweetness and tenderness and light and everything good. But the love that Hadewijch connects with, the love that Rumi connects with, the love that Kabir connects with and recognizes as the essential power of the universe, is a love that is beyond both what we call good and what we call evil, and uses both opposites as ways of working its mysterious schemes in reality. So what the mystic, and Hadewijch is the supreme mystic of this love, comes to understand is that divine love is a tremendous mystery that can only be unveiled as you yourself go through the different stages of the mystical path. It's not only a mystery, it's a mystery that works sometimes through horror, chaos, darkness, what we call evil, just as much as it works through everything we would like it to work with: sweetness, light, justice, tenderness, protection. And that our one real hope, she says again and again, is to surrender ourselves increasingly to the mystery of that love, the completeness, the fullness, the power of that love, so we can be infused by it and given a courage and a perseverance that lasts through absolutely everything. In other words, so we can be made undaunted by anything, because love will give us the eyes to see that whatever is happening, however terrible, can, from the perspective of the initiated mystic, be understood as an invitation to go deeper into love and find the courage to go forward from that initiation.
So what you're describing is something that I have always called the sacred
Yes,
or the divine.
the holy.
And so it's hard for me, I must confess, to call it love, because it is so much bigger than any definition of love that I've ever had.
I
you know,
understand, but that's why the mystic's definition of love, the one I've just given you,
right.
can help, because it can help take you out of even the biggest definition that you've had before that realization of how the great power of love, power that you experience in mystical experience, which is a bliss power, which unmistakably is love. Because once you experience that bliss, you know that the source that is giving you that experience could not be anything other than unbelievably joyful and loving and celebratory of your whole being. And yet you have to come to understand, and this is why the mystics like Hadewijch and Rumi are so important, you have to come to understand that that love is not something that you can sentimentalize in any way. It's love from the highest perspective, which works through the opposites. Let me just read you a couple of poems
Sure,
that will
absolutely.
allow that expanded vision and understanding of love to flower. And I think that our two books are deeply related, because if what you're saying is, let's go beyond hope, let's go into the descent, let's discover the mystery of compassion and community that we can only discover in descent.
Right.
What I'm saying is that what you're saying implies something greater even than hope will be revealed to us in the descent. And that is this love, this enormous unifying power that can give us far deeper feeling for each other, and far deeper feeling for nature, and far deeper hunger for communion, whatever happens.
Right.
Okay?
Mhm.
So this is Hadewijch. If only to honor love we could shun strange consolations and rewards. If only in love's honor we could adorn our depths with a glorious vision, in noble will and noble action. If only in honor of love we loved with love all that love loves, so her splendor were known to us. Love would stream her being to us in fruition and deathless knowledge. You see, when I read that wonderful paragraph of yours, when you say, when we get over hope, we get into the descent and discover mysteries of communion and
Yes.
compassion and interdependence. That just leaps off from what Hadewijch is saying, because she's saying,
Yes.
if only to honor love we could shun strange consolations and rewards.
Yes.
The New Age has a sentimental vision of love. So love is supposed to protect us, whatever we do. Love is supposed to make everything right, whether we're trying to make anything right ourselves or not.
Correct.
Love is seen as a doting parent whose duty is to really clean up our shit, however enormous the mountains of it are. And that is a ridiculous, narcissistic vision of love, which is based in a ridiculous, narcissistic human vision of love.
And I think also that that notion of love is devoid of conflict. You can't have conflict.
Exactly.
Conflict. But I'm thinking that Hadewijch, being a Beguine in those days,
Yes.
was having conflict all over the place. And
oh my God,
they
yes.
only lasted 100 years, right?
Right. Hadewijch is writing out of the mystical spring of the Beguines. She's writing at the beginning of the 12th century. And that was a time when the church was playing with these nice ladies. The church thought that, oh, well, it doesn't matter that they don't want to get married and they don't want to be nuns. We'll let them play their little games, do their laundry and earn their money and meet and sing and dance. But what happened was, of course, that these women became fiercely independent, fiercely empowered in their own glorious way, and started producing the most astounding visionary work, of which Hadewijch is the most glorious, in a way that truly pissed off the boys' club. The boys' club suddenly became both jealous and angry that these women were claiming their own female, feminine power and amazing, unique ways of approaching love, and that made them want to destroy them because they realized they couldn't control them. So in 1312, after about a century when they didn't do much about them, they burnt a woman called Margaret Porete at the stake for writing what she wrote, The Mirror of Simple Souls, and that put a kibosh on the whole movement. But thank God Hadewijch was able, despite all the agony and opposition of her life, because you're right, it wasn't simply that she was compelled to face all of this latent hostility that flowered later. She was also somebody of an enormous passion and sincerity herself, and was thrown, not only opposed by the church eventually, but also thrown out by her own community, who found her authenticity too much and wandered the countryside as a beggar and may have ended up dying in a leper colony. So, I mean, she took her own charism of passion to the ultimate length.
Well, I think, Andrew, if I might say this, I think that, there's such a delusion in the New Age movement about conflict.
Oh my God.
If there's any conflict or there's any disagreement, love isn't happening. Love isn't present.
Absolutely.
And in fact, you look at John of the Cross, you look at Teresa of Avila, and many of the mystics, they had conflicts going on everywhere.
Inside and outside.
Yeah. They didn't just sit and, in lotus position, meditate and feel bliss and love all around them all the time.
Well, the idea that love, if you understand, that's what the great advantage of having some grasp on this monumental divine understanding of love is so important, because if you understand through the testimony of the great mystics that this love is itself a coincidence of opposites. It works with agony as well as joy, and chaos as well as order, and madness as well as sanity. It works with anything it can get its hands on,
Right.
in a completely free way to do whatever it wants to do from the depths of its own mystery. That's the love the mystics are talking about. So it makes any sentimentalization of love by any so-called mystical system or any other system ridiculous.
Right.
It's simply not facing the reality that love is always creating, which obviously has both death and life, agony and joy in it, interbraided on every level. And one of the strengths of the passage you wrote about the rewards of going beyond hope is that the descent that it then creates for us, demands of us, is a descent in which we can discover this mysterious fusion of opposites. And that's what I wanted to talk about next, because one of the things you return to, not obsessively, but with tremendous intensity and clarity in your book, is something that I know you feel very deeply about, and that is the necessity in a time as dramatic as ours of learning how to hold the tension of opposites. And I would love it if you would talk about what you mean by learning to hold the tension of opposites, and how it refers to this time particularly, and also how it refers to discovering your undauntedness, your ability to fortify yourself at the deepest level, because it's something that we both share in different ways so deeply. And then I'll read a poem by Hadewijch in which he talked
Okay.
absolutely about these paradoxes in a
Sure.
way that I think that you're going to recognize vibrantly.
Well, it is holding the tension of the opposites that makes me or anyone undaunted. And that expression, holding the tension of opposites, comes from Carl Jung, who spent, early in his life as a child, he was in an attic up there playing with little images, and had a lot of conflicts going on in his life, and those playing with those images helped him resolve and be with some of those conflicts. And then after he split from Freud, he had sort of a breakdown, an emotional breakdown. And so what he discovered out of his pain is that when you can hold on one side the beauty, the joy, the love, the possibility, and over here the suffering, the pain, the darkness, the not knowing, the uncertainty, you can hold those in the same body. And maybe you don't hold them at the same exact moment, but 1 minute it's this and 1 minute it's that, and you go back and forth with those. And that's a very big job, to hold all of that in the same body, to hold what we see every 2 minutes on the TV screen, the forest fires, the extinction of animals and other species, the floods, the Arctic ice melt, the horrifying devastation of our planet. And over here, on the other side, the beauty, the vastness, the amazement, the awe, the love, the sentimental love that we experience in our lives, the companionship, the friendship, the romantic love that we experience, the kindness, the caring, all of the good things about human beings and our planet. And we hold those in the same body. We don't say, oh, it's all crap and it's going to hell in a handbasket, and I'm just going to take a lot of drugs, or I might just kill myself. Or over here, oh, this is just all an illusion. It'll be fine. Everything's wonderful.
Yes.
Neither one of those is true.
Right, because they ignore the other. Right.
Must be held together.
Yes.
They They travel together and need each other.
They appear together because the
Yes,
reality is, as the great image of the dance of Shiva, reality is simultaneously creation and destruction. It's happening
yes,
both at
yes,
the same time. It's
absolutely.
chaos and order. It's darkness and light. That's reality.
Yeah.
But what happens when you hold these tensions, when you're prepared, as Jung said, to hang on the cross of these opposites? What happens then? Because that seems to me to be the key to your book and to Hadewijch too, because she faces these opposites in her journey to love with unbelievable nakedness and authenticity and refusal to celebrate either one or the other, but to live them both together in a mystery of union. What happens through that union of these opposites?
Well, Jung was an enormous fan of alchemy. And alchemy was the transformation of baser metals into gold. It's metaphorical. And so he used that metaphor throughout his work. And what the alchemists did in their transformation process was hold, these baser metals alongside the refined metals.
Right,
And then from that, the transformation to gold took place.
right,
And so what happens in us as we hold the tension of the opposites is subtly, sometimes blatantly we'll see it in a flash, but subtly something in us is transformed. And the gold in us begins to come forth in a
through
way
the tensions.
through the holding of the tension that could not come through if
Right.
we just said, well, I'm going to focus on the good parts of me. I'm going to focus just on love. We've got to have the darkness in there to help us transmute. And when that transmutation happens, it creates something much more beautiful than just focusing on sentimental love all the time.
Right, and this is the benefit of the mystical definition of love, which works through the opposite, so that when this terrible tension is tearing you apart, if you can have some mystical experience of love using those tensions to create a masterpiece, an
Yes,
engolden masterpiece
yes,
out of you, then you can find the undaunted courage to go through the whole damn thing, however painful it will be at moments.
absolutely. I
Once
couldn't
you
have said it better.
understand
Yeah,
what Jung understands from the alchemist, that nigredo is essential to albedo and rubedo, that you cannot get the higher unions that the alchemists were looking for, either in metals or in themselves, except by passing through this intense experience of the tension of opposites. Once you really understand that, and further understand that that's love working, it's not your sentimental love, but it's divine love working in ways that you may not understand at the beginning, but if you align to it, it will reveal itself as merciful and transformative beyond anything you could ever have imagined.
absolutely. I
And
couldn't.
isn't that the theme of what you're saying in Undaunted? You're saying, look, we're in a very extreme situation which could very well mean our extinction. But if we approach that situation only with rage or despair or worse, paralysis, we won't discover the gold that is potentially in that situation, a gold that can only emerge when we develop the strength to hold these unimaginable opposites of potential extinction or potential engoldenment, regeneration.
Right. I think
That's the key to your message, isn't it?
yes, yes, yes. And, I think much more strength is available to us by holding the tension and experiencing that transformation, transmutation, than if we were just focusing on love.
Well,
Sentimental love.
not on love, on our sentimentalized version of love.
That's what
So
I
that
mean.
isn't love,
Yes, yes,
because that cannot sustain you
no,
through the
no,
real
No.
onslaught of what's really dark, really chaotic, really painful. If you're just sentimentalizing love and turning all your attention to that, to what you call the light, you will never find the fortitude to be able to withstand the assaults of the
Yes.
terrible things that are actually happening both inside us and outside us.
Absolutely.
So
Yes.
you'll never know how strong you really are until love has worked with its opposites to birth you into the new unity that can only be born from this tension.
Absolutely.
Let me read you from Hadewijch because she
Please.
really knows this. This is on page 257 of this great woman, and I absolutely love this poem. This is an absolutely astounding statement of these paradox working through the mystical notion of love. What is sweetest in love is her storminess. Her deepest abyss is her most ravishing form. Lose your way in her, you touch her close. Die of hunger for her, you eat and taste her. Love's despair is certainty. Love's most brutal wounding, her all-healing grace. Wasting away for her is to be in her peace. Her hiding is finding her always. To languish in her is to glow in health. When love conceals herself, she reveals what we can know of her. What she keeps back are her gifts. Wordlessness is her sublimest speech. Being taken prisoner by love is total liberation. Her most savage battering is her most tender consolation. Her ruthless robbery is vast profit. Her vanishing is her drawing near. Her most profound silence, her sublime song. Her fiercest rage, her dearest thanks. Her most frightening menace, pure faithfulness. Her grief, the melting of all grief. That's perhaps the greatest expression of the way in which these paradoxes in reality work to forge the undaunted, humble, engoldened self that doesn't need hope in the old sense because it knows itself fortified by the real, because it's undergone this crucifixion of the tension of the opposites and been resurrected as the philosopher's stone, an embodied, humble, divine human being, quite able through that experience to meet whatever happens with more connectedness, compassion, grace, and kindness.
You know, I love what she says about grief. And
Mm.
in this process of holding the tension of the opposites of what's going on in our planet, I am finding that one of the most healing and powerful experiences, and I think necessary experiences that we
Absolutely.
have, is grieving.
Together.
Grieving together, grieving the losses of our planet, grieving the losses that are all around us. You know, when we see the mass shootings, when we see the forest fires,
When we see the
grieve.
crazy people, the fascist thugs trying to
Yes,
destroy democracy,
yes,
the
absolutely.
terrible things that we have to see, yes.
Yes. And so allowing ourselves to grieve and not saying, oh, well, that's all an illusion because everything is light. No, it's not a freaking illusion. It's the truth. And we need to grieve it because grieving brings us life and liveliness and ultimately joy.
Absolutely. Grieving brings us each other. Because
Yes.
when we
Yes.
grieve together, we come to love each other in a much tenderer, more compassionate way. If you're saying to somebody, don't grieve, it's an illusion, what you're really doing is preventing yourself from feeling with them the pain that you should also be sharing. And if you were sharing it, you would be so much closer to your true self, to their true self,
Yes.
and you'd be imbued with the connectedness and the compassion that would light your whole life up and would bring you, in the end, as you say, a much deeper form of joy.
Because grief is love.
Yes. Love, well, St. Francis says, love grieves like a bird sings. Love suffers like a bird sings. With
Yes.
love comes loss. With love comes danger. With love comes vulnerability. And with love comes grief. But without love, what are you going to live?
Exactly.
So, what would you like people in the end to leave with when they've read Undaunted? What would you like people to leave inspired to become and to do? You asked those two questions which we discussed in our first interview. The question is not whether we're going to get through, although we all hope that some miracles will happen or that something will be reversed, but what are we going to be and what are we going to do? What's your personal answer at this moment in your life from your own undauntedness? What's your personal answer?
Well, let me just refresh folks, if they didn't hear the first interview, the two questions that I weave into the book throughout are, who do I want to be? And what did I come here to do? As we consciously open our eyes to this horrible global crisis that we're in. And so as I hold the tension of the opposites and I sit with those questions, what did I come here to do? Who do I want to be? That informs me of how I should approach this crisis, how I should perceive it, and what I need to give.
Yes.
What qualities, what gifts in me are being called for? This is an assignment.
Yes.
And the question is not, how is it going to turn out? The question is, how am I going to turn up?
Yes.
Right?
Yes. And how you turn up it plays an indispensable part in how it's going to turn out.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
And how do you feel you do turn up?
How I feel I turn up is in the work that I'm doing every day. In my writing, in conversations like this, in the courses and workshops that I offer, and in the ways that I serve and that I support people around me who are doing sacred work, all of that. And then just to, I live in a very beautiful place. I live right at the edge of the Rocky Mountains, and I'm, 10 minutes from being lost in the forest. This background behind me is just a background, but I could go up 10 minutes from here and be in this very kind of background with no one around. And sometimes I do. And, it's like to savor all of that. And at the same time that I'm savoring it, I'm grieving the loss of it because it's going away.
But that makes it even sweeter, more intense, more amazing, doesn't it?
Yes, it certainly
If you have this full certainty that it's all going to be okay, you miss the absolutely exquisite, passionate beauty of something that could very well vanish.
And the same if you ignore this situation, which most people on the planet, I believe, are just ignoring climate catastrophe. It's a concept in their heads, but they don't feel it in their guts consciously. Now, I believe everyone is feeling it on some level.
Of course, and
it's causing all of the madness and trauma that we're acting out all over the place. But when we don't allow ourselves to really see it, then we miss all these incredible gifts. And
just when we don't see what the other great theme of your book, the rise of authoritarianism, if most Americans, it just boggles my mind. Don't see what is happening right in front of our eyes, the creation of the infrastructure for a fascist state. But if you don't see it, you don't appreciate the freedoms you still have, and rise to do everything you can to protect them, because you know that if there's any chance of any solution for our crisis or our predicament, it can only come from a democracy. It can never come from an authoritarian state. And even if we are meant to go extinct, we will go extinct more gracefully only in a democratic cradle, because authoritarianism is disgusting and naked and terrifyingly powerful and vicious.
And also, I like to make a distinction between the view from 35,000 feet and what's happening on the ground. From
Right.
35,000 feet, yes, climate catastrophe, potential extinction, the thinning out of the human population, and on and on and on. And so for that reason, some people say, well, it doesn't really matter what's happening on the ground, because collapse and this demise is going to happen, and so the hell with anything
But that's
else.
a complete cop-out, isn't it,
Right,
too?
a complete
It's
cop
a
out. And so,
weird cop-out is saying it's all an illusion. Yes.
right, and the view on the ground of what's happening day by day is important, because that's where we can offer our gifts.
Yes.
That's where we can make it a more humane demise, a less brutal demise. I do believe the demise is happening,
Oh, yes.
but I want to make it less brutal by being aware, and yes, being an activist, being involved in fighting for democracy and exposing authoritarianism. And one half of this book is about the climate crisis. The other half is about the tyranny that
Oh,
is,
yes.
that we're walking blindly into, as Americans particularly. So, that's the full subtitle, which is, Undaunted, engaging intentionally with climate meltdown in an authoritarian world.
Living fiercely into
Living
climate
fiercely,
meltdown.
yes.
Right. And your point, the deepest point in what you're showing is the deepest point in Love is Everything, Hadewijch's great poetry, which is that if you accept the conditions of what is actually happening and meet them from the fullest depth of your whole being, tuned to truth, to the sacred, then even if it turns out appallingly, you will have lived a profoundly meaningful, generous, magnanimous, loving, noble, joyful life. And what a paradox that is.
Well, as I mentioned in our last conversation, Stephen Jenkinson says these terrible times, we can look at them either as an affliction or as an assignment. And so if I'm fully present to this crisis, living constantly the question, who do I want to be and what did I come here to do? Then when it's all over, whatever that looks like, I can say, I did my assignment. I completed my homework.
Let me end with Hadewijch completing her homework. This is
Yes,
one of her
yes.
last poems when she really describes the ultimate revelation of love and the ultimate revelation that all mystics and perhaps all human beings are looking for. It's the last poem in this book, Love is Everything. All hail, primordial source in ourselves that gives us noble divine knowledge and feeds us always renewed love and detaches us in your wisdom from every external accident. The unity of the naked truth, abolishing all reason, holds me in this emptiness and forms me to the simple nature of the eternity of the eternal essence. Here of all thinking I am stripped bare, and those who have never truly understood Scripture would never know through reason how to explain what I have found in myself, boundless, no veil remaining above all words. So even in the most extreme situations, or perhaps especially in the most extreme situations, we can discover through undauntedness and through the magic and the power and the grace of a love beyond any definition that we've ever had of love, we can discover this boundless freedom that we really are. This is why the mystics are so essential for us. And this is why I believe that it would be a wonderful experience for anyone who's brave enough to read both Undaunted and Hadewijch together, with all of the themes that Carolyn so brilliantly and groundedly brings out, being re-experienced just as brilliantly and groundedly in the great majestic work of this 13th century woman who's returning now to help us discover our undaunted, boundless, free nature, whatever happens.